There is a Bitcoin consensus soft fork being proposed, which has a activation date and already around 5 to 6% of nodes signaling that they would run the new code to change what Bitcoin is, to tighten the rules of Bitcoin. This is called BIP110, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 110. I'm going to explain it thanks to this handy website, which I will link in the description. It's BIP110.org. We're going to go through the information on here, explain what this is proposing to do. I'm going to talk about what I think about it, if I think it will get activated, and I'll actually show you how to simply update to signal for this and what that means as well. My name's Forrest Hodel. I'm a Bitcoin educator. I actually run the Bitcoin Masters online learning community, which you can join in the link in the description. I have exclusive courses on there, an 8-part series about Bitcoin basics and beyond to jumpstart your learning about this amazing protocol. And I'm also in the process of creating and posting the Bitcoin Digital Privacy Masterclass as well. I also do one-on-one coaching. If you need some extra helping hands to secure your Bitcoin properly, you can book me for a one-on-one session through my website, pathtobitcoin.xyz. The purpose of it is protecting Bitcoin's purpose. Temporarily limit the size of data fields at the consensus level in order to correct distorted incentives caused by standardizing support for arbitrary data and to refocus priorities on improving Bitcoin as money. This was all sort of kicked off by the change to the updated version of Bitcoin Core, which is the reference implementation of Bitcoin. Essentially, if you're running a Bitcoin node, you're going to be running Bitcoin Core. Essentially, Bitcoin Knots is Bitcoin Core with added patches to it, and that became something that people were running to signal that they didn't like what the Bitcoin Core update was going to do, which is changing the default on the mempool policy. So there's sort of two different sides of Bitcoin. You can change the mempool policy of a node without changing what Bitcoin is at a fundamental layer, or you can change the consensus code, which changes what Bitcoin is. You can broaden consensus rules, and that will create a hard fork. And there's a soft fork, which this is, which is tightening the rules and making Bitcoin more restrictive at the consensus layer. So it's saying, here are additional rules that you follow, and it is backwards compatible where a hard fork is not. So let's get into a little bit more about what this is talking about. Key points here: temporary protection. So this only is designed to be implemented for 1 year. After 1 year, it will need to be either renewed or essentially what the hopes are, is what I'm gathering, is that within the year of it being implemented, that the problems are sort of temporarily solved that it's trying to address. And within that time, they can develop a more permanent solution if it is just this, or if it is some sort of iteration on this. It limits data storage, so it restricts arbitrary data, which is definitely what it's the main thing it's supposed to do. And arbitrary data on your node means that it's harder to run a node. Maybe it's harder to download the node, or to store the node, or to process transactions as they come in, or what have you. And, this has future consequences as well. And, the fork wars of 2017 were fought over node runners being able to run nodes easier. And this is an attempt to also do that. It says here that all known monetary use cases remain fully functional and unaffected. There might be some nuance in there. There might be some people that disagree with that, but that's what this is aiming to do. Bitcoin is money, right? We all agree on that, except for a handful of scammers that are trying to piggyback on what Bitcoin is to use it to embed data that can be transcribed into images, and those images and that data can be sold for a premium. So those people are scammers. I think the vast majority of Bitcoiners believe that Bitcoin should be money. They just believe that, they either believe that this is the way to deal with it or not, or what have you. Refocuses Bitcoin. It signals that Bitcoin's priority is being the world's best money, not data storage. So that's what I'm talking about with data storage. When you can store data on Bitcoin in different ways, and that data can be transcribed and turned into things, right? That's all data is on your computer is you have things that can read that data and visualize them or turn them into something else, like an image, like music, video, what have you. So here's how to run BIP110 on all of your servers. Umbrel, we're going to take a look at how to do that. It's really, really easy. It's also very easy to do on Start9. I don't have experience with my node, but you can also download a version of Knots that signals for 110. That's one thing that should be known here, is all of these are not installing the soft fork software to, limit these certain rules, to restrict the rule set. They are signaling that when this becomes active, that we will run this. And also, if 55% of nodes, I believe it is, we'll maybe get into more of this, but I just off the top of my head, I believe it's 55% of the nodes. If they are signaling for this, then it gets activated early. But I think it's on August 4th. Again, the information will be in here, but I think it gets August 4th, I believe. Could be wrong on that. It gets activated regardless of how many nodes are signaling for it. Now, the thing about soft forks is they just get implemented, and there's people running the soft fork and it's still compatible with the old software as well. And either that becomes the majority over time, or it just gets ignored, and that's how it sort of fades away in a sort of an easy way if it becomes not successful. There's just a handful of people running it, and less so percentage-wise over time, and they become sort of less relevant and less important. That's sort of how a soft fork might fail. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So starting with the inscriptions hack in 2022, a trend emerged around embedding arbitrary data into Bitcoin transactions. This creates unnecessary burdens on node operators and diverts development focus from Bitcoin's fundamental purpose, being sound, permissionless, borderless money. Data storage competes unfairly with payments, making Bitcoin transactions unnecessarily costly. The last halving as well triggered this runes thing, which you can actually go back. If you look at the block of the last halving, you can see outrageous cost to do a transaction, and that's because they were non-monetary transactions. And if you were trying to do a monetary transaction on the base layer, it all of a sudden became very difficult to do so because of spam. This encourages reliance on third-party payment processors, making Bitcoin payments easier to censor. So your workaround from that might be to use an exchange, or to use some sort of third-party payment processor, as it said, which is not ideal for the decentralization of Bitcoin. By limiting data storage, this proposal liberates developers from endless scope creep, enabling them to focus on what's really important: Bitcoin success as money. Bitcoin should do one thing and do it well. Yeah. So that's what's interesting about this, is people say, well, spam isn't a problem. Look, there's 0 sat per V-bytes. We had to lower the 1 sat per V-byte so that we could get even more transactions in, because people weren't even willing to pay 1 sat. And it's really just not a problem. Another thing people will say is that fees will push out the cost of spam. That's not really the case. And I think that as we slowly, as developers, make it easier in some ways, make sort of a what some people might say as a trash bin, right? What Core30 did was they changed the default of op return, saying, well, it's better if spammers are going to spam on Bitcoin, which we can't stop them from doing, so it's better they do it in this op return field instead of anywhere else, and we'll make a garbage can for them to play around in. Thing is when you start doing that, where does it end, right? That this is sort of the mission creep, or the scope creep that it was mentioned here. So I think it's better to fight these people, and there's actually historical precedents to believe that. If you look at how ETH and Ethereum was formed, Vitalik was a big Bitcoiner. He was part of Bitcoin Magazine, the early days of Bitcoin. He wanted to create Turing complete smart contract capability, expand the use case of Bitcoin, right? Lower the restrictiveness of the rules of Bitcoin, which is the opposite of what this does. And basically, he said the filters on Bitcoin, the Bitcoiners in general, are creating a hostile environment to do this. So I'm going to go do this somewhere else. And he created ETH, and that's a playground for, I could use some language there, but for some people that aren't Bitcoiners. We'll just put it that way. And you can allow people to do that over there and not care about them, and nobody else will either, except for maybe Tom Lee for some reason. And that is actually a really good example of how being sort of toxic and saying Bitcoin has one simple use case, and it is money. It is transferring value permissionlessly over to other people. It has very restrictive rules. We all obey those rules. We voluntarily agree to those rules by participating in this. And tighter rules are better, actually, because it allows us to be free within those rules. It allows us to not have all the vulnerabilities, all of the problems, all of the bloat, all of the community. The community doesn't devolve into a community that no longer cares about running nodes, no longer cares about decentralization, no longer cares about money. It is diluted into a community that cares about these smart contract capabilities on the layer one and all of this, which we do not want. We want Bitcoin to be money, and anything that pushes it away from being money is a problem. So how does it actually work? I think this is a really interesting question that we need to get into. Some of this is technical, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. You can kind of understand these things or not to some degree. I think it would be probably good. Like, one thing you could do literally is go into each of these and just smash this into an AI and say, hey, what the hell does this even mean? What does this impact Bitcoin? What does this potentially do to node operators? Is there a negative to this or not? I'll try to expand on these as well to some degree as well. So first one here is output size limits. So new outputs are limited to 34 bytes, except op return, which allows up to 83 bytes. So op return allows for 83 bytes. That has historically been normal. So script pub keys, which is a type of output of Bitcoin, exceeding 34 bytes are invalid unless the first opcode is op return, and then 83 bytes are valid for the total amount, as that would be in the op return that the 83 bytes is. So this is a really small amount of data. Basically, this is just restricting the script pub keys so that you can only send a certain amount of data in a transaction. That's really going to limit what people can do above and beyond just financial transactions. Data pushes. Data pushes and witness elements are limited to 256 bytes maximum. So the op push data, this is a script function, payloads and witness stack elements exceeding 256 bytes are invalid. So this is just another way to restrict how much data can get pushed through in a transaction. And here we have witness version restrictions. Only well-defined witness versions, V0 and Taproot, can be spent during the deployment. Spending undefined witness or tapleaf versions is invalid. Creating outputs with undefined versions is still valid. Taproot restrictions. Taproot annexes large control blocks and certain opcodes are temporarily restricted. So witness stacks with annex are invalid. Control blocks limited to 257 bytes. Op success and op if, op not if in tap scripts are invalid. So this is going to restrict some of the basically exploits that were figured out with Taproot to create these large Taproot transactions. So that simply does that. So one thing that's really interesting here is essentially a lot of people were worried when this was first proposed that this is going to confiscate people's Bitcoin. This is going to make Bitcoin, certain chunks of Bitcoin, unspendable because they have this kind of stuff in them. They have these taproots with op if in them and everything. But what you can see here is input spending UTXOs created before activation are exempt from these rules. So this is a going forward enforcement. So any of these transactions that have any of this that already exist can still be moved, can change, they can become compliant within the new rules beyond that, but they still exist and are still okay. So there's no confiscating, there's no stopping people from spending transactions if this soft fork gets enforced by the entire network. So here we go. Of course, you have questions, I have questions. Let's get into them. Here are some common questions we should address here. Why is this proposal temporary? 1-year deployment allows the community to evaluate the impact while developers work on a longer-term solution. So that's the other thing too, is considering that this is temporary, we'll actually see, does it work? Is there an exploit that can be found around this? Did this solve what we wanted it to solve? Did it not? What would we need to change going forward? We're in a place here within Bitcoin where these things kind of need to be addressed, in my opinion. So this is sort of temporarily addressing them to, in some really simple, smart ways, and then we can figure out how to address it more permanently as we go along. Are there any trade-offs? Yes, limiting taproot control blocks could complicate advanced smart contracts like BitVM. Upgrade hooks are temporarily unavailable for other software. Some wallet software using op-if in tap leafs may need updates. However, these are acceptable short-term trade-offs for the immediate benefits. So BitVM is some sort of scaling solution, I believe. I'm not super familiar with it. Again, this is temporary. So if that ends up being developed more, the advanced smart contracts, and it's something that we want on this using Taproot or whatever, then we can, in the the update beyond this, we could change that. Some people, this is going to be something that people disagree with. Of course, some people are going to agree with it. And, the last caveat, these are acceptable short-term trade-offs for the immediate benefits. That's really what you have to decide. Is that accurate for you and what you believe Bitcoin should be or not? Is there any risk of funds being frozen or lost? In theory, yes, but the proposal goes to great pains to avoid affecting any known use cases. So there could be edge cases where some transaction might get restricted that wasn't necessarily meant to. Funds are completely unaffected if they don't use Taproot in standard ways, or can be spent via KeyPath or other expected tap leafs. A 2-week grace period between lock-in and activation gives users time to migrate any affected funds. Okay, so there's also a 2-week grace period. That's interesting as well. I would like to know a little bit more about that, because it says, created before the activation are exempt. Do they only have 2 weeks to move those exempt or not? Maybe I'm misreading that. Won't spammers just spread their data over multiple fields? So basically find another way to spam Bitcoin. And again, the more difficult we make it for them, the least likely they will actually do it. So it says limiting data size ensures abuses are non-contiguous and obfuscated, requiring users to divide files into chunks of 256 bytes, raising the cost in fees and effort. Again, you make it more difficult, it's going to become less likely and less often, and it sends a clear message that data storage is unwelcome. And it breaks it up. So that could be part of how we say, yes, there is bad stuff in our nodes that we run at home, but it's all broken up and people have gone through great lengths to make it that way. And essentially I have some sort of plausible deniability that I'm just storing this raw file within here in a contiguous manner, in a sort of a all-in-one package kind of way. Why not let the fee market manage data storage? The fee for data storage goes only to the miner. So this is interesting. So there is a fee to include data into Bitcoin, just as there is a fee to use Bitcoin, right? But that fee goes to the miner. The node operators feel the brunt of data being stored, and they don't get any compensation. So it creates an unfair burden where miners accept one-time fees while nodes provide perpetual storage for free. And people are saying, well, who wants to store, Bitcoin's blocks are so small anyway, I can only store this much, blah, blah, blah. Why would I ever want to do that? Why would you ever want to store something of importance to you on over 100,000 other computers around the world for the rest of eternity? That might be valuable to somebody, right? That is a valuable proposition to have. Now, of course, if it only becomes data storage that nodes are doing, no node is going to run that, right? So nodes are incentivized only to run nodes if it's for the monetary purposes, for their own individual purposes. So the less that is the purpose of running a node, the less nodes will be run. So, it's much more expensive to, if you think about this, right? Think about trying to store something even small on 100,000 computers around the world. You're probably going to have to pay quite a lot and maintain a fee of quite a lot to have access to all of those data storage solutions for that piece of data you're trying to store. And you can do that for a small one-time fee to a Bitcoin miner, and then you can have it for free forever, stored on everybody's node. Pretty valuable thing. So we want to limit how valuable and how usable that is as data storage. Why limit script pub keys to 34 bytes? Script pub keys must be stored indefinitely in quick access memory by all nodes. Modern usage is all 34 bytes or smaller, as actual spending conditions are in the witness. Large script pub keys enable data abuse and malicious poison blocks that take a long time to validate. Is this a slippery slope towards banning use cases? Now, this is interesting. So this person says, no, these rules enshrine long-standing principles of Bitcoin. This soft fork doesn't restrict monetary activity, only non-monetary data storage. The temporary nature reinforces this is a targeted intervention, not a new direction. Does this solve spam completely? No, spam is best fought with policy filters, not consensus. This soft fork minimizes the impact of malicious miners and closes the worst case risks while sending a clear message that data storage is not a supported use case. This is my thought process around this too. I really wish that we didn't have to go all the way to the soft fork to change these things. Policy and filter changes, as I said, are much more nimble, much more. It's not such a massive change. It's not such an abrupt thing to do. So it feels like an easier thing to do in that way. It kind of sucks, in my opinion, that it's come down to this, that we feel the need to change something on the consensus layer. I think a lot of people are just reasonably very apprehensive to a soft fork, as I was as well. I've definitely fence sitting a lot longer than I probably should have been. I should have looked into this a lot further, a lot deeper. But now I'm kind of thinking that this is a good idea to just rug the scammers, just to make them to make it very clear here what Bitcoin is, and to do it in this soft fork way. Yeah, I think it's sort of the best solution at this point to do this. So important considerations. Again, the BitVM and advanced contracts, they'll need to wait until expiry or use testnet and sidechains to operate. Wallet compatibility. Some wallets using Miniscript may create tap leafs with op-if. There's a grace period of exemption for pre-existing. Okay, so there is a grace period. So there's the 2-week period where people will have to move the pre-existing UTXOs. So it's not permanently. They have a period of time to be able to move these things, which, you know, is pretty good too, to put a little fire under their ass to move these. Yeah, this is interesting. So there might be some wallets that are using this, and they'll have to change their code. Otherwise, people could get screwed over with their transactions that have these tap leaves with op-if. Okay, so let's take a look at this timeline here. So signaling's already started in December 1st. Maximum activation height. Okay, so at block 965664, an activation requires 55% miner signaling prior to that. Then we have activation, 2 weeks post lock-in. New rules take effect. Grace period allows users to prepare. So 2 weeks after that, after it gets activated, then there's a 2-week period where the rules are not restricted and not tightened. People can move. There's the grace period, essentially, by the looks of it. Then it expires 1 year later. So 52,416 blocks after activation, the restrictions expire automatically. That's written into the code. So within this 1 year period, it gives again, there's a grace period for people to move their transactions that are affected. And then there's a grace period of 1 year for us to figure out a more permanent long-term solution. So now I'm going to show you on my Umbrel how to update to this. So if you're running Bitcoin Knots, there's a version of Bitcoin Knots that signals for BIP110. Somebody will make other things, other node implementations. I doubt Core will have one, but probably somebody will have a different name for one. There's a lot of people that are just not going to run knots in general because of all the controversy and people pro and for and all this, right? Sort of the tribalism, maybe political stuff that's going on within Bitcoin. So there'll probably be another reference implementation that signals for BIP110 as well, but it won't be knots. But you can do this now with knots. So if you go to your node on Umbrel, you go to settings, you go to Bitcoin knots version, and you might be running any one of these. This is the latest version of knots. This is the BIP110 signaling version. So you would just click this and press save changes, and you would be signaling for BIP110. Now, as you press this, you have chosen to signal the BIP110 with Bitcoin knots. So you will be warned about this, which I think is a really, really good reason, a really good thing that they're doing. I think we shouldn't have people just, oh, I need an update, I'm going to update, and not knowing that they're signaling for a soft fork. I think it's a really good idea to know what you're doing as a node operator and consciously make the choice if you want to signal for this or if you don't want to signal for this. I think it's all within everybody's rights as a node operator to have a belief and to come to their own conclusion. That is your right as a node operator. So you should be able to do that. I think in general, it's a really good idea to, push spam and scammers away from Bitcoin and make a serious monetary use case here with Bitcoin, and to restrict things more is a good idea. We do not want to go in the other direction, in my opinion, and loosen rules. So I'm for this. I've been previously fence sitting. I'm for this now. Yeah, we'll see how well that ages. But the other thing, which we'll know soon how well it ages too, is do I think this will be successful? I do think it will be successful. If you actually look at the way that miners operate, they're completely financially incentivized and they are completely beholden to the nodes. There's, if Bitcoin miners, if they were in control, they wouldn't put up with the halving, right? The halving is them receiving half as much Bitcoin through the subsidy. They would increase the amount of Bitcoin they get, but they can't because they are beholden to servicing the rules that the node operators enforce. They say, you can mine on this network. We will give you this much because it's written into the consensus rules, and you can't have more than that. If you try to take more than that, try to create more, try to mess around, we're just going to say your block's invalid. We're going to say you're a bad miner, and you're going to be punished for doing so, essentially. So this, I think, incentivizes miners to go towards the more restrictive software, because they will mine more compatible blocks that are compatible on both, these temporary splits that happen all the time with Bitcoin, or happen often, where blocks can become orphaned. That can happen, and you're more likely to mine as a miner an orphan block if there's a large section of nodes that are trying to enforce tighter rules through a soft fork. So I think that there's actually an incentive for them to adopt this over time, if there's enough sort of movement up ahead of time. So I think there'll be some diehard people that are running BIP110 that will never not run it, within all these timeframes or whatever. They're not giving up on this. They believe in it. And I think that will signal to the miners that they have to adopt it, and other nodes will adopt and understand this as time goes on as well. So I do think that there's a large... it's still possible that it just sort of fades out, that it becomes not interesting to people, or we move on to something else. That's obviously possible as well, and that would be sort of a failure of this soft fork to get adopted. But I do think there's a high likelihood that this gets activated. Well, it's getting activated, but that it succeeds. But we'll see. We'll see. I might be wrong. I might be right. Who knows? This has been a full deep dive on the BIP110 reduced data temporary soft fork. Hopefully you learned something. You can look deeper into it through the link in the description. It's very easy to update your node to signal for it, which you can do so if you feel like that is the right choice. And thanks everybody. Again, you can check out the links in my description as well to get everything you need as a Bitcoiner. There's the best Bitcoin exchange, the best Bitcoin wallet. You can run your own node and get 5% off from the Start9, 15% off of the Stampseed kit, and check out the links to book me for a one-on-one or join the Bitcoin Masters community. Thanks everybody.